Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, this is now episode 74 of the podcast The Forward, myself with the Mahdi Locke. And today we are going to finish, insha'Allah, our four-part series on Waqf, or a summary of the rulings of Waqf, from the book Sharli Qult al-Nafis. So I've just published part 4 on my blog, so I'll just read from that. So you're going to hear my mouse clicking. But I will be reading from that because I've gone through it, I've edited it. There may be more edits, but inshallah this will all be part of the new edition of the Book of Waqf, which I'm working on. I'm editing it here and there, and maybe it will be available sometime, maybe after Ramadan or so. I'm not too sure yet. I've got other things to work on, and I'm working on this. In other news, the book The Wonders of Waqf is now available on Amazon. Obviously it was published on Lulu first, but it's now available on Amazon, which means it should be available on other retail sites such as Barnes & Noble or W.H. Smith's or Waterstones or whatever. And the same also applies for the other books I've published recently with Lulu, such as The Great Event Has Occurred and Islamic Law is Not Misogynistic. And in other news, there's also the book by Imam al-Bulti, The Approach to Human Civilization in the Quran. My translation, that is now out. That's available. It's being sold by Jamalun, the website Jamalun, and other sites. I'm just trying to figure out from Dar al-Fikr what those other sites are, and then inshallah I will be putting up a book release post on my blog, inshallah, and then I will also do a podcast to virtually launch the book, so to speak, to talk about it, summarize it, and go over some of the posts that I've already published regarding it, inshallah. So that will probably be the next episode of this podcast. So back to Waqf, and we're now at the point where we're discussing the disconnected endowment, an endowment that's been cut off. So the jurists, this is getting Imam al-Shatri speaking, he says, the jurists have mentioned that sometimes an endowment is disconnected at the beginning and sometimes is disconnected in the middle. If it is disconnected at the beginning, such as someone saying, I have dedicated this house to a man, and he doesn't specify who, and then to Zayd, the endowment is not valid because there's no recipient at the beginning, and one of the conditions of an endowment is implementation. And it is an endowment dedicated to someone unknown. Right? So this endowment cannot come into effect because we don't know who to start with. Right? There has to be a starting point. There's no recipient, there's no beneficiary, so how do we implement this endowment? The Imam continues, he says, as for being disconnected in the middle, such as someone saying, I've dedicated this house to Zayd, and then a man, who is unspecified, and then to the poor, it is permissible. And when it is the turn of the unknown recipient, they have said that it is spent on those nearest in kin to the endower, i.e. the waqif, while another position is that it's spent on the poor. Right? So we have a situation where someone says, I've dedicated it to this person, i.e. Zayd, a specified person. Then they dedicate it to someone who's not specified. We don't know who he is. Right? They say a man or a person or whatever. And then to the poor. This type of endowment is valid. It's put into effect. Now, after Zayd passes away, presumably, or he's no longer able to receive this endowment for whatever reason, and it comes the turn of this unknown recipient, well, there's two opinions. Some people say it's spent on those nearest in kin to the endower, and then the other opinion says that this endowment then goes to the beneficiary of the poor, because they're the next in line. If someone says, I have dedicated this house to Zayd, Amr, Bekr, and then the masjid, it is spent on the three, i.e. the first three in the list, at the same time. You have Zayd, Amr, Bekr. He's just giving these as three generic names, right? Zayd, Amr, and Bekr, and then the masjid. The point is that because the document says then, right, that indicates sequence. So Zayd, Amr, and Bekr, they are the beneficiaries. They are the beneficiaries of this endowment at the beginning, simultaneously, and not the masjid. The Imam continues. He says, if one of them dies, there's a difference of opinion regarding the share. So if Zayd dies, or Amr, or Bekr, and you have two left, then what happens? Some of the ulama have said that is divided between the remaining two, and this is the mu'tamid, this is the relied upon position, as long as the word masjid is preceded by the conjunction then. Another position is that the deceased share is transferred to the masjid. Okay? So, just to recap. So here we have an example where an endowment is made to the benefit of three people. They're called Zayd, Amr, and Bekr. And then the masjid. Okay? So, to begin with, Zayd, Amr, and Bekr, they are the recipients of this endowment. One of them dies. Let's say Zayd passes away, and we have Amr and Bekr are left over. The Mu'tamid position is that Amr and Bekr are then the beneficiaries. Right? They continue benefiting from this endowment. And what's implied here is that they're going to continue benefiting from this endowment until both of them have passed away. So once Zayd, Amr, and Bekr, all three of them have passed away, then it becomes then the endowment goes to the benefit of the masjid, right? And this is why it's the Mu'tamid position, as long as the word masjid is preceded by the conjunction then, i.e. thumma in Arabic, right? And these things are really, really important. And it's one of these beauties of the Arabic language where we can be very, very specific, but at the same time we can allow for interpretation. And this is why, if you were to look at, say, Surah Al-Ma'idah, the 5th chapter, verse 6, which is the ayah of wudu, where Allah talks about the actions that you need to do to complete your wudu, there's difference of opinion amongst the ulama as to whether taratib, like doing the actions in sequence, is farad or not, or is it merely recommended. There is difference of opinion as to whether muwalat is obligation or merely recommended, i.e. to do all the actions of wudu in immediate succession, i.e. you don't leave any gaps in between. And it comes down to these words. Like, why is Allah saying wa and? Allah's not saying fa or thumma, because the word fa tends to indicate immediate succession. Right? So if I say Ja'a Khalid fa Zayd, Khalid came, then Zayd, that fa would indicate that Zayd was literally was pretty much stepping on the heels of Khalid. Right? He's like right behind him. But if I say Ja'a Khalid thumma Zayd, Khalid came, then Zayd, the thumma there indicates that Zayd came any time later. Maybe he came an hour later, maybe he came half a day later, maybe he came a few days later, or whatever it is. But these things are important. These things are very important and very interesting at the same time. The Imam continues, and he says, and he mentions here, another position is that the deceased share is transferred to the masjid, right? So this is another position, which is that you have Zayd, Amr, and Bekr. Zayd passes away, and instead of his share going to Amr and Bekr, his share then goes to the masjid. This is another position in the madhab. The Imam continues. He says, an endowment is never sold, even if it is in a state of disrepair, as it is only permissible to rent it, except in a situation of compulsion, such as the state deciding to open a street and deciding to demolish the endowment because it is located in the area where the project is to be built. If the local authority pays compensation for the endowment, then it is obligatory to take the compensation, and then one buys or builds something in place of it. Only the Hanbalis allow for it to be replaced. Now there's a footnote, which is they allow for it to be replaced even when there is no compulsion. Because again, an endowment is not meant to be sold. Why? Because it's no longer the property of any human being. Because again, as I discussed in earlier episodes, and as discussed in these notes, that we have to distinguish between the ayn and the manfa'ah. We have to distinguish between the article itself and its usufruct, or its beneficial use. So the beneficial use can be owned by people, but the actual ayn, no, and that's why you can't sell it. It's like for example, when you rent a car, or you rent a house or an apartment, you are sahib al-manfa'a. You are the one who owns the usufruct of that car or house. You have the right to use it, right? But you're not sahib al-ayn. You don't own the car itself, which means you can't sell the car. You can't rent the car to someone else. You can't put the car or the house, the apartment in your will and let your heirs inherit it from you, because you don't actually own it. And this is the same thing with a waqf. When we talk about a waqf, when something is made a waqf, Allah is the sahib al-ayn. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner of the thing itself. Human beings after that are simply ashab al-manfa'ah. They simply own the usufruct, but they cannot sell it or put it in their will, and so on and so forth. Okay, back to the text. Now, here's the next part of this this section. The ruling for dedicating an endowment to oneself. Okay, so this is an interesting thing. Can you make yourself the beneficiary of an endowment? Now, the Imam says, he starts off again. This is the Shafi. This is the position of the Shafis. This is the Shafi method. It is not valid to dedicate an endowment to oneself. Meaning, you can't do it specifically. I can't do that. I can't make an endowment and say this endowment is for the benefit of Mahdi Locke. I can't do that. However, this is what the Imam continues to say. He says, but they have said, i.e. the ulama, that if someone wants to dedicate something to himself, then let him mention an attribute that is specific to him and no one else. Such as him saying, I have dedicated my house to the eldest of the family of so-and-so, and he is the eldest of them. The endowment would be valid. All right, so if I said, I dedicate this house to the eldest son of my father, and it turns out to be me, then it's valid. This is used by some people. The Imam continues. He says, this method is used by some people to prevent themselves from selling, but Imam Abu Hanifa says that it is permissible to dedicate an endowment to oneself. While it is the opposite of the most correct position in the school of a Shafi, his proof is strong. Imam Abu Hanifa's proof. He says, if someone deserves something, then it is an endowment, and if he doesn't deserve it, then it's a case of ownership. And this, again, this is this difference between owning something and not owning something. Because when you're a beneficiary of endowment, you don't actually own the thing itself. This is what needs to be kept in mind. And you can also see that dedicating endowment to oneself, it's also valid, for example, like if you're going to make an endowment to a category of people, and you fit under that category, that's perfectly fine. So if I were to make an endowment for the benefit of followers of the Shafi madhab, then that I'm included in that, right? If you're a Maliki and you make you set up a school or meshit for the benefit of, or a hostel or a dormitory for the benefit of students of the Maliki madhab, and you are one of them, then obviously you can benefit from it. If you make a masjid and it's for the people in this neighborhood, and you live in that neighborhood, obviously you're going to benefit from it. But yes, what Imam Shafi'i is mentioning is a very, very specific example where you don't actually mention yourself by name, but you describe yourself, so to speak. They continue and they say, and there are exceptions to the most correct position regarding the validity of dedicating endowment to oneself, and they include bringing the idea before the ruler, and the rule regarding it is valid. Al-Khatib, this is Khatib al-Sharbini and Al-Mughni, and this is the main part of the book that I've translated, the main part of the Book of Waqf, which I've translated. Inshallah, that will be, as I said earlier, this will be available, inshallah, next Ramadan or next summer. Al-Khatib stated this in Al-Mughni, and it is acted upon today because his ruling has not been nullified. In the Hanbali school, it is valid to dedicate an endowment to oneself, and one must follow the proper procedures in the courts and registers. Abu Hanifa allows for endowment to be temporary, and then it becomes inheritance, and this is beautiful for whoever wants to do it. The Shafis have said that it is not allowed to replace anything from the furnishings or doors as long as they are fit for use, unless it is possible for them to be used in the same endowment, such as making them pieces of wood that can be used to cover the roof, in which case it would be permissible to change them. In Al-Minhaj, Imam Nawawi says, this is Imam Nawawi's book, the most correct position is that it is permissible to sell the mats of the masjid if they have deteriorated, and its columns if they are broken and only fit for burning. Now, this is the actual quote of Al-Minhaj, and you can refer to the book itself, and you can, because again, just remind readers and listeners that the Book of Waqf, the main body of the Book of Waqf, the main body of the Book of Waqf is Al-Khatib al-Sharbini's commentary on the Minhaj of Imam Nawawi. So you can find the full discussion in the book itself, where Imam Nawawi says this. He says the most correct position is that it is permissible to sell the mats of the masjid if they have deteriorated, and its columns if they are broken and only fit for burning. Now, Imam Shafi'i asks a very interesting question. He says, what's strange is the words, if they have deteriorated. If they have deteriorated, because if they've reached that state, who will buy them? All right, he's asking why Imam Nawawi worded it this way. Likewise, he continues, he says, likewise, regarding replacing the old doors on an endowment for new ones, the jurists have said that it is not allowed, because removing and pulling out the doors of masjids and putting other doors in their place, while the original ones are still fit for use, will deny the endower his reward for them, and this constrains the renewal and renovation of endowments. if we wanted to install other doors that were harder, stronger, more solid, and more beautiful, then why the prohibition? Even if we wanted to transfer the old doors to another endowment, such as from one masjid to another, they would say it is not allowed. However, they would say it is not allowed because they've been dedicated to this masjid. Right? So this shows that the fuqaha have been very, very stringent about keeping things the way they are and trying to ensure that the reward is going to the waqf, going to the person who made the endowment, the endower. They're being sticklers here. They're saying, well, if someone has dedicated doors to a masjid, and they want to get the reward of being the endower of those doors for that masjid in perpetuity, they think, well, if we change those doors, that means that waqf he's no longer going to get the reward, right? And this is why the prohibition's there. This, we can replace these doors with harder, stronger, more solid, more beautiful doors, but that waqf, like he still wants his reward in the hereafter, and we might be denying him. This is what the fuqaha are thinking about. Anyway, we have an example though. Imam al-Shafi'i continues. He says, however, Sayyid Ali bin Abdullah Saqaf, when he rebuilt the masjid of Imam Taha bin Umar al-Saqaf in Sayyun, and Sayyun is a city of Hadramaut, he transferred some of the old doors to other masjids, such as the masjid of al-Aydrus, Sayyid al-Alawi, who's a great jurist. So he must have found, he transferred the masjid of al-Aydrus, and then he says, Imam Shafi'i, that Sayyid al-Alawi, Sayyid Ali bin Abdullah Saqaf is a great jurist, so he must have found a proof for that to be allowed, right? Because again, some fuqaha being sticklers are saying, well, if you take things from one masjid and put them in another masjid, the endower, his reward according to his document, according to his waqfiyah, is that he's getting reward for this masjid. If you take it and put it in another masjid, then how do you know he's still going to get the same reward? Imam al-Shafi'i continues, if the doors are old, according to the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, we are subjected to another problem, because he says that the value is spent on the endower's inheritors. The priority would be to spend it for the benefit of the masjid if they consent to it. This is if they are limited in number. If they are not limited in number and it's not possible to include all of them, then it becomes clear that the money is spent in the same way that the lost money is spent. Okay, so this is an interesting point here to finish on. Well, not to finish on, there's one more thing coming up. If the doors are sold, we have these old doors of a masjid. What happens is, he said the priority, Imam Abu Hanifa said the priority would be to spend it, Imam Abu Hanifa says you should spend it on the endower's inheritors. Okay, so the waqf, he's left this world, he dedicated his door to this masjid, or he dedicated these doors to be doors for a masjid. The doors have been sold now. We have this money. What do we do with it? Imam Abu Hanifa says it goes to the inheritors of the endower. The Shafi'is say no. The Shafi'is say the priority would be to spend it for the benefit of the masjid, because that's what the endower originally wanted to, or that's what he originally sought. He wanted these doors to be for the benefit of the masjid. So this is the priority. This is what we should do if the inheritors consent to it. And this is if they are limited in number, right? And what we mean by this is that if they're limited in number, and we can consult all of them, we can ask all of them. If they are not limited in number, and it's not possible to include all of them, right? Because again, if they're limited in number, there's two things here. We can ask them. We can, number one, we can consult them. But number two, we are able to distribute the money amongst them, right? And again, this discussion of limited, unlimited, you can find this in Kitab al-Halal wal-Haram by Imam Ghazali, the Book of the Lawful and the Unlawful, which again, that's another translation that I'm looking to republish in the near future. And so it's a very, very important thing. It depends on the situation, but Imam Ghazali goes into a lot of detail as to how he defined limited and unlimited and so on and so forth. But anyway, he says, Imam Shafi'i, to finish this point, he says, if they are not limited in number, and it is not possible to include all of them, then it becomes clear that the money is spent in the same way as the lost money is spent. Okay? So again, if they're not limited in number, and it is not possible to include all of them, so you might have many, many inheritors, and we can't give we can't distribute the wealth amongst all of them. It's just not possible. Then it becomes clear. It's obvious. It's dhahir that the money should be spent in the same way the lost money is spent, i.e., it should be spent towards the masjid, or in a broader sense, is spent towards the interests of the Muslims, right? The Muslims in general, because that's what the endower wanted when he set up the masjid, or he dedicated those doors to the masjid, and so on and so forth. Okay, now the last point is an illustration of an endowment, and in the Sharh, the Imam says an illustration of an endowment would be for Zayd to say, "I've dedicated this house to the poor," and then we have a footnote where the Imam puts out in detail. He says, one writes in the form of the endowment, "All praise be to Allah," to proceed. Zayd has dedicated, right, so you put your name in, Zayd has dedicated and retained his well-known house for the benefit of the poor, and it is a valid, everlasting endowment that's not to be sold, given as collateral, taken ownership of, because now it belongs to Allah, transferred or replaced. It is a valid endowment in the revealed law, and it fulfills all the legally considered conditions. He has begun by looking at himself, to be responsible for it, right? So he makes himself the nadir, and then the most mature of his children, and then their children, and this is how things shall remain forevermore, as long as he has progeny, and then one writes the date, right? So this is a basic form of how you would set up an endowment. You show what it is, who is it to benefit, for the benefit of who. It's meant to be everlasting. It's not to be, and you stipulate that now that it belongs to Allah. No one can take ownership of it. It can't be transferred. It can't be replaced. You mention that it's valid in the revealed law, and then he makes himself the administrator first, and then he stipulates who the administrators are going to be from now on. And he says it's going to be the most mature or the oldest of his children, and then their children, and then so on and so on, for as long as he has progeny. And this is an example of how you would write a waqfiyah. So alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wa salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. This concludes this episode and this series on waqf. This is just a summary of the rulings of waqf. Inshallah, the fuller picture will be available in the new edition that's coming out. But if you do have questions, please feel free to leave a comment below this video or in the comment section on my blog, and I will be able to answer, inshallah. But this is just a summary. I hope that listeners have found this of some benefit, and I hope that people can take this and inshallah be inspired to set up some awqaf. This is what we need to do. And again, I have to reiterate this point over and over again. Do not think that set up a waqf, it has to be something massive. It has to be like a hotel or an apartment building or a house or a masjid. It doesn't have to be like that. It can be something very, very small. You can give a chair to a masjid. You can give books to a school. You can give a mushaf to a Dar al-Quran or whatever it is. There's so many things you can do that are affordable, that are conceivable, that are realistic, that you can do that are within your means. Don't tell yourself that it has to be something massive. And again, and that's why, if people look at the wonders of waqf, if you get a copy of the Wonders of Waqf and you read that through, you can see examples of, you have awqaf feeding into awqaf. So you can have a hospital that's a waqf, or a school that's a waqf, or a masjid that's a waqf in and of itself. But then what happens is other Muslims jump in and they set up other awqaf to benefit the masjid, right? So, or the school or the hospital. So then the hospital is a waqf, but then someone donates beds, someone donates chairs, someone donates medicines or whatever it is, or tools, right? Surgeon's tools or surgeon's devices. Someone might even hire someone as well. Like I like to mention the Wonders of Waqf. Like someone might hire someone to have some sort of, as a waqf, to have someone who's has a certain job in the hospital. And one of the things I mentioned, and there's a video on this where I talked about the book. One of the hospitals, there was someone who was appointed from a waqf. He's hired from a waqf to go into the hospital and just walk up and down the ward and say nice things about the patients within earshot, right? The power of suggestion. Just say, oh yeah, look at that guy. He looks better today. He's not so pale. He looks like he's coming along, right? And then the patient's meant to hear that, and that's meant to motivate him to get better, to feel better. All these kinds of things. So again, do not be daunted by this, do not think that setting up a waqf is outside of your means, outside of your capacity. No, it's not. There are plenty of things that you can do within your capacity to set up a waqf, and inshallah you will get immense reward from now until the Day of Judgment. And with Allah alone is every success. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.